Grognards of Gaming. We have a very special episode today because joining myself, Rob the Grognard dog, and my usual partner in RPG, Miracle
Miracle
Mike,
Mike.
we have a very special guest. We promised at the end of our last episode we would be talking about themes. However, we're going to do that in the next episode because this episode we have our very good friend with us, Paul. Now, Paul, we have been talking about you since the very beginning of Grognards of Gaming, and you always come up in the context of creating characters, creating player characters, creating character backgrounds, and so forth, creating NPCs in your character's background. And we always marvel at how well you do it. So we've been wanting to have you on and to talk about your creative process. So this is our opportunity. So, Mike, if you don't mind, I would like to start with one with a question, and then you can take it away. Paul, we always talked about when Phil and I were doing the show, and now that Mike and I are doing the show, we always start with talking about our origin stories as role playing gamers. So please tell our audience, how did you first get into role playing games? What is your origin story?
Well, it all started back in, I think, 81 or 82. I was in St. Jerome School in West Long Branch, New Jersey, and one of my friends at the time, Jason Blaylock, was in the D&D. So he started a game in school that we would do before school, during recess, during lunch. If we had free time, we're allowed to have free period or whatever, we would play. And this is um, my first introduction into gaming. They were playing D&D First Edition, and the module Jason was running was White Plume Mountain. So pretty
Everybody's
much,
nodding. Mike and I are all nodding. I'm sure people are.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's a classic. And Jason hands me a character. I don't remember the name or the race, but it was a ranger. And I kind of, as I saw how to do this, how to play the game, I kind of got hooked. And then I went out and got my own stuff and had some other friends from school that I played with. And then there was just my cousin when I moved back to Philadelphia. And then about a year into it, I come across you guys, and the rest is history. You know all the rest.
Had you really been in Philadelphia a year before we met?
I was living in South Philly.
Ah, gotcha, gotcha.
Yeah.
All right,
We had moved back from Jersey, and we stayed a year in South Philly.
gotcha, gotcha.
Okay.
Okay, all right, Mike.
So one of the things that Rob and I talked about when we were talking about source material is, you know, early on taking our first characters and actually like making our own versions of characters out of stories and things of that nature, and knowing your creative process and things of that nature, and the things we've watched over the years. I'm curious as to your view. Now, you just told us what your first character was, but the thing is that I'm interested in is the difference between your early characters and your characters now. How do you see the progression and where you have gone from those early days to what you do now?
Uh, the progression is incredible. It started that very first character that I played in Jason's game. To me, it was just a, a sheet with a name and a bunch of statistics. I'm a rookie player at this point. I didn't have full grasp just yet. So it was just a name and numbers, like an equation of sorts. And as I got to learn the process a little bit, it was a little bit more than that. It kind of grew. It wasn't until like late high school, early college ages that I really began to develop these characters into almost living people, almost with a complete background and everything. It started simple. I think the most simplest one at the time was one that we did for Rob Star Frontier's game, and this was one that Rob and I were doing on Thursday nights early on, and it was a character by the name of John Rayel. He was a human adventurer, and he was kind of like the Equalizer. That was like the big show at the time. So he was kind of like the Equalizer in a way. And then you came into the picture, joining us for this character, and it just kind of expanded from there. And then it kind of went to Asimov esque after a while, which was
Yeah,
really cool.
I'm glad you like that. Now, just so that I don't think at this point our audience really has a sense of like how when you say how your characters become almost like real people. Do you mind if I share with the audience, like for example, Frankie, a little bit about Frankie? Is
Oh,
that
go
all right?
ahead. Yeah,
All
that's
right.
fine.
So because in order to appreciate what Paul is talking about, what we are talking about, you really have to see this. So, all right. So Paul's current method is what do you call this? A packet, right? You email me a
I call it
PDF. What do you call it?
a jacket.
A jacket. A jacket. Okay. And so it's multiple pages. And so the first page is like character concept, name, age, date of birth, where the character resides, who the character's parents are, who the character's siblings are, the character's education. So this character, give you a little bit of background, is I'm running. It started out as like a police drama, okay, and I talked about this in an earlier episode of Grognards of Gaming. After the Marxist riots of 2020, you weren't allowed to tell stories where police are heroes anymore, and I resented that. But I did want to sort of reflect the zeitgeist in my storytelling. But I was running into this creative block, and I wasn't sure how to reconcile those two things. And I said to Paul, I'm just having trouble coming up with police stories anymore because they seem dated. Because I'm having a hard time reflecting like the new attitude towards the police, like this anti-police attitude. And Paul says to me, just don't worry about it. He says, instead of telling police stories, what do we say? How about we say that my police character leaves the police force after these riots and she becomes a private eye. And we'll just make it a private eye story. And I was like, that's great. And so that's what we've been doing. And so this character that was like a policewoman is now a private eye. But we still have the same background. So when we were doing the police story, we've got siblings, we've got education, we've got friends and associates. Then on the next page, a long story about all of her friends and associates, and then other family, that are sort of involved in her life, and where she lives, and what her personality is. And this is like a whole page of her personality, year, like, politics, backstory. I mean, this is so detailed. And look, this is the continuing backstory, a full page, and onto another page. And it's fantastic. It's not like it just goes on and on endlessly. Like it's chock full of good stuff. And just so I could give you an idea, like how real this feels. Let me just focus on friends and associates, for example. So Frankie's two best friends date back from her days at St. Anselm's, which was what, her grade school. Her
Right.
first friend,
It's a
Laura,
real grade school in Brooklyn.
a grade school
All
in
her
Brooklyn.
schools are legit.
Okay, there you go. So first is Laura Lazier, an ADA in the Manhattan DA's office. Second is Gabriela Gabby Hernandez, a doctor and Frankie's personal physician. Johnny Lazier, brother of Laura, is an ex-boyfriend of Frankie. They broke up after Frankie turned down a marriage proposal because he wasn't ready to settle down. Johnny is a member of the fire department in New York. Henry, Frankie's bartending friend, works at the gang's favorite bar, O'Sullivan's. Another one of Frankie's hangouts, though, is a cop bar called Vinny's, owned by Vincent Savoldi, a close friend of her father's from his homicide days. Frankie's father was a homicide detective. It's like, what? Where does this come from? All of these people. This is such a real character. Like, I gotta know, Paul. What inspires you? How do you get this stuff? Does it come from real life experiences? Does it come from fiction that you've seen? Is it an amalgam of both? Where does this come from?
It really comes from an working imagination. My mind doesn't stop.
It really doesn't.
it keeps going. So
I mean,
a lot
if
of
I
this,
didn't know you better, if I didn't know you better, I would say this is the work of a madman. But I know you're not a madman. It's the work of a
well,
genius. It's
as far as you
fantastic.
know, as
I'm
far as
sorry.
you know,
What
there's
I
some
want to
people
know,
that may disagree with you, but
where's the novel?
but pretty much what happens is at the time I was working. It's a 45-minute train ride to Philly and 45 minutes back. My mind wanders and I all these ideas come. And it's gotten to the point where down here, like you seen the basement from coming in and gaming. The piles of games that I have all over the basement. Somewhere in this mess, there's a folder marked concepts, and in it there's a legal pad, and it's just full of concepts. Some we used, others we didn't. It just kind of comes to me because my mind just constantly works. So
It's
that's
amazing.
kind of why my dojo time and time picking up an instrument, concentrating on music, are the things that kind of stop it, put it on pause, or else I'll be exhausted. It's exhausting sometimes if I
Yeah,
don't keep it in check.
you're an artist at heart. I think that you've got like the heart of a poet. So there's something very artistic about you, and I think this is your way of channeling it. Anyway, go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry. I don't mean to monopolize Paul, but I'm fascinated by his
It's fine. It's great stuff, and it's and thinking about this, and it's like I said, where's the novel? Eventually, you got to write a novel. You got to put one together. And sell. I buy. I know I buy it because I've seen some of the stories that you've written and things of that nature. It's amazing. Um, so thinking about this, and you're talking about different inspiration and concepts. So it's. I know you have a strong background in history, and I wonder, how much of this is historical versus fictional versus original. So when you're looking at this, where do you take most of your inspiration? That's what I'm curious about. So is it, you're always thinking, but where are the inspirations coming from? What are the things that you look at and go, oh, that's a wonderful idea. What sparks that imagination?
All right. Well, with the Frankie character, it was it was based on a character from NYPD Blue, played by Kim Delaney. Shout out to Kim Delaney. She's a Philly girl, Manny Young. And I took that character. Her character was Diane Russell, and I'm like, well, okay, fine. We have this single New York City police detective, but what if all this was in her life instead? So I took an image of that character and I put her in a different situation, almost as if I was doing a spin off with that character in a way. But it it's an original character, but there was a model for it, and and pretty much that's where the origin ends, and then my creativity kicks in when
So
I
so
say what if,
basically,
and I go from there.
so you take a character, in that case, a character point in time, and stop at episode 6 and then take them somewhere else or something like that. Similar is what you're saying.
Well, not really.
Okay.
None of Frankie's life ever mirrored the Russell character.
Okay.
I just took that idea of a single female detective in New York City
Okay.
and ran with it.
so the archetype or the trope,
Right,
whatever
the
it may be,
trope. Yeah,
you went with that,
Okay.
and the rest was
yeah.
yours. Okay. All right.
And
Awesome.
then I'll
Now,
find inspiration in other places for other characters, depending on the character.
such as where inspiration.
Um, I will say this: John probably figured it out, and you may have already figured it out because we talked about it. John's Star Trek game character Mackenzie, who was supposed to be a protege of Captain Pike, where I got the whole backstory for him was that scene in the original pilot, and they show it in the Menagerie episode, where Pike is having that conversation with the Doctor, what's on your mind for us to fight on Rigel 7? And I took that incident and just ran with it.
The
And
martini scene.
the martini scene, yeah. And I just ran with it.
Okay.
So sometimes it's something as little as that, and I can get a ton of mileage out of it. And it's still early on that game, so Lord knows where that's going to go at some point.
Yeah.
Because also, what I try to do is sometimes these characters can play as part of a group, sometimes as a solo adventure, and I kind of give little seedlings if you guys need them. Because I used to do the same with Steve. I'd give him something and he'll run with it.
Steve is another game master that we've gamed with a lot. And yes, I definitely notice that you plant, well, at least I take them as seeds, whether you intend them to be or not, because your backgrounds are so detailed that there's so much in there for me to work with as a game master that I could just like, like for example, the two bars where there's the bar she goes to with her friends. There's this other cop bar she goes to professionally, and you gave each bar a bartender and an owner, and I'm like, I could just take the bartender of one of those bars and like build a story around that person, that involves Frankie. It's just it's great.
Right. Well, the inspiration for
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
the inspiration for Henry, the one bartender, came out of a Liz Fair song. Just one little line. I was talking to Henry, my bartending friend, and
That's
it's
great.
that line, and boom, here's a character.
There's a character. There you go.
So I can find ideas through anything, just about.
That's amazing.
Incredible.
All right,
Ronald.
Charlie.
9 times out of 10, it works. I'm not saying everything is gold, but there's some clunkers, and I know I had mentioned it to you, Rob, that there's some ideas that we got to revamp. I mean, they're
Yeah.
still playable, but we just got to revamp them.
Sure. I mean, yeah, there's always room for character development, and that's it. All right. So Paul, here's a little question that's going to involve a little introspection, right? So, are there any specific themes or motifs that often appear in your characters and their backgrounds that you either do it purposefully or maybe you don't do it purposefully, but you notice you're self aware that these themes crop up, and if so, why do you think these themes resonate with you?
All right, we'll move it to one of my other successful ideas, and that's the game that you mentioned in an earlier podcast about the Dumas swashbuckling musketeer game.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Sebastian. Originally, if Mike doesn't know the entire backstory, he's kind of catching a glimpse into what kind of character this that Sabah can be when provoked. He wasn't a very nice character at first. It's more of like a redemption story with him. Here he is. He's the youngest son of a lower level noble family that's probably as old as France itself. One of the older noble families, but not that important. So, what's left for him? The monastery. He's not that kind of person. So he went off to Italy, learned to fence. He was in the employ of different people in Italy, usually hired muscle, duelist, that kind of stuff. And he would kill at the drop of a gauntlet if he had to. Now he comes back. With where the story began with him as a player character, he gets a letter from his sister telling him father's sick, come home. He comes home. Father dies, and he just gets caught up in events and finds himself in the service of the king as a musketeer.
Right. This
But
is where
still,
Paul's backstory ended and my adventure began. But
right?
but it began based on things that Paul wrote in his backstory.
Yes, but as we're you see throughout the game, there's still that dark side at times where he settled a point of honor, and it was very brutal, blunt revenge, which I don't think Sabah is totally finished with yet. And I've seen as the game moved on, the priest that's with the party now, who Sabah always suspected of a lot of evil things, and he kind of sees that this is true. I think now, because he is kind of trying to redeem himself, that dark side is going to come out again, but instead of personal honor, it's more for justice now.
Okay, so I like this example of Sabah. I like that you pointed to Sabah as an example because what I'm hearing from you is the motifs or the themes that you perceive in your own in running as a thread through your many characters is integration of one's shadow, that sort of psychological theme of integration of one's dark side, and redemption. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that's very insightful. You're very self aware of that, and that's insightful because as I look at your other at many of your other characters, I see that. I don't quite see that so much with Frankie. She's a little bit different from your usual characters, but like
Yeah.
I see that with your most recent Star Frontiers character and and various others. Um so yeah, that's very interesting. And why do you think integration of the shadow or integration of one's dark side and the theme of redemption resonate with you as a role playing gamer?
I think it's an avenue to explore. Really, a lot of times this kind of stuff, it satisfies my curiosity into human nature.
Hmm.
If I was in that situation, what would I do?
Hmm.
And and especially if I was living in that particular time period,
Hmm.
it it was a brutal time, really.
Yeah.
So I kind of I get my curiosity satisfied in a way.
Right. And I think Mike hit on it earlier when Mike pointed to the fact that you're an historian. You can really see that I think you're exploring in your mind, like so much about various historical settings, and when you're on the train commuting and you're thinking about all of this stuff, all of this academic historical knowledge that you have in your head, you're immersing yourself in it in your imagination, and you're coming up with these characters, and like it's just brilliant that how you decided, well, Sabah is the youngest son of this minor landed gentry. So what is his life like? Like what motivates a person like that? Well, he's got money, but he has really no little purpose. So he's going to go find adventure. He's going to go looking for dragons to slay. He goes to Italy. He learns to be a swordsman. I mean, it's just that really shows your keen awareness of your discipline, history, and it's integrated with your imagination, and then you've got this sort of anthropological interest in exploring the human psyche. So I think that this mix, this is the formula. I think this is the formula that makes these fantastic characters that you come up with. Now I want to turn it over to Mike because I have one last question before I want to wrap it up. So I want to give Mike the opportunity to ask everything he wants to ask. All right, so go ahead.
Okay.
And this is my last one, and this is a little bit offbeat, and this may be for both of you, because this is something I came upon after many years we had not played together. And then one day, Rob had called me and said, "Do you want to go out and see Paul and surprise Paul?" And I think that's when I joined the Musketeer game, if I remember
Yes.
correctly. So you want to go out and you want to surprise Paul and you want to play with Paul. And as I was playing Fate games with you guys, there's this thing that kind of takes it to a meta level, and I'll explain. We were going through different genres in Fate and different timelines and things like that. But Paul was tying his characters together with one little, little piece or something. and I
Yeah.
have no idea where that came from. But it's like it's like a surname or an item or some kind of story or something. Where did that come from? I
Yeah,
have
before
to
you
know.
answer, Paul, let me just clarify for the audience. So what Mike is saying is all the characters that Paul plays in all the different games and all the different genres it's like 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon. There's some thread
Yes.
that connects his policewoman to his musketeer, and another thread connects his musketeer to his gangster in the 60s Vegas game, and another thread connects the gangster to his Star Frontiers character. There's always some interesting connection. So that's what Mike was referring to. Go
Yes.
ahead.
Yes.
Uh,
The seven
really,
degrees of Paul's character.
another new drinking game. Um, what happened there was, again, my mind runs wild sometimes, and it almost became a game within a game.
Right.
So here's Frankie Garibaldi, the police detective. So let's attach the Vegas game character. The that guy, he's a 1960s member of the Banana crime family. What if he gets sent to Vegas to get him out of New York because he's getting too cozy with the daughter of a prominent police family, and that was the Garibaldi family. Who the original background was she come from a long line of police officers. So what if that happened, and then in the swashbuckler game, Sabah was employed by a merchant named Garibaldi in Italy, and may or may not have procreated with his daughter. That remains to be seen. I mean, that was something Rob and I discussed at one point. Like,
Yeah.
what if he did this when he was in Italy? Like, I'll email Rob and like, hey, what if this happened to him earlier? Like, that's
Right.
how my mind works. It just runs rampant like that.
It's
And
funny.
then,
I was gonna say it's become like almost like a gimmick that Paul does this, but gimmick has a poor connotation. Paul came up with a better word. It's become a game within a game, and we
Yeah,
have fun with it. Yeah.
it's better.
it's
Yeah,
yeah, it's a challenge of sorts, and I think we linked the Garibaldi family to three other games.
Yeah.
Actually,
I think we did.
the post Deep Space Nine Star Trek game, where that Mackenzie, who's a relative of the Mackenzie in John's game, actually.
Oh, I didn't even know that connection. That's funny.
I mean, that yeah, one of his first captains was a Garibaldi,
That's hilarious.
and then in we did it in the World War II game, one of the
Right.
pilots,
Right behind.
one of the pilots that the character Bohannon knows was Pete Garibaldi,
Oh, right. I forgot it.
and
Yeah, it's
in
almost like the Garibaldi family is like a hub.
and wait a minute. I want everybody here to notice something. If you watch Paul, he's not reading from any notes.
That's right.
not yet anyway.
Here, man. It's
Go
like
on ahead.
frightening what's up there. It's
And then wait, I think the last one. I'm trying to remember the last one because Mike actually knocked me off course.
Sorry,
But
sorry.
oh, I remember now. The Master Vigilante game. There's the two detectives.
right.
The second detective was Garibaldi,
Jeez, that's hilarious.
and
That's
I
so.
think that's as far as I took it at this point.
But this is like a Stephen King world where he
Yeah.
ties every
Yeah.
little
Everything.
thing together.
It's the Paul
So
verse. It's the
it's
Paul
Yeah,
verse.
great.
All right. So here's my final question for you, Paul. So what advice would you give to novice players who are looking to create a more immersive and well-rounded character?
Use your imagination. Think about what ifs, and think about it. And you're not necessarily going to come up with something right away. You might have to work at it. But I kind of found myself watching this documentary, 6-part documentary on Turner Classic Movies called The Power of Film. And the guy's name escapes me right now. But there's 2 episodes I would highly recommend. Episode 3, which is the character. And there's this filmmaker turned professor said characters become strong with their supporting cast, more or less. So that's why you see, especially with Garibaldi, how she has like all these characters that come to life, and they're there to actually kind of push and pull her in different directions and challenge her and sometimes help or whatever in certain areas.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then you see the same thing with the characters in the swashbuckler game. He's got his slightly older sister who is strong willed, and that comes back to haunt Sabat at times. And I think it's a great foil. It's an excellent foil, in fact. And then he has his brothers that kind of like, hey, calm down, chill. You have to do things this way because of who we are. And then he has his one friend who the answer to everything is the family wine. And and it kind of goes like that. I would recommend.
You might say that for each flaw that you build into the character, you might build an NPC into the background that cabins the flaw and keeps the character sort of on the straight and narrow. Maybe.
Yeah, yeah, they all serve a purpose. And
Right.
like I said, the episodes 3 and 4 of The Power of Film. Now, I've watched those episodes very recently, so it's well after the fact. And what he says in that documentary, the guy's name I forget, but it's really worth watching. Kind of made sense to me. I'm like, oh, like kind of that explains why I did that in a way. Like I did it subconsciously, and he just kind of validated my thinking really.
Mm-hmm.
And episode 4 is heroes and villains, and I got a lot out of that episode too.
Allow me to say it's probably not so much subconscious as it is intuitive. I think that you have an intuitive grasp of how to create characters, and so this validated your intuition. Although I guess that's not necessarily, it doesn't mean it wasn't subconscious, but I think
And
there was more
it's in
to
the
it than just
ballpark. I mean, you're not far off.
yeah.
But I found those episodes very helpful and actually to understand the process a lot better.
Hmm.
If anything, it was an aid to me to help me understand myself.
Hmm.
And really, kind of, even if you get stuck, I there was a play by email game that I don't know if you remember back in the maybe about 20 years ago. The guy Jeff in Georgia had the play by email Star Frontiers game that we were in.
Yeah, I remember it well. Yeah.
Right. Well, one of the guys who played the other Jalazite in that game,
Hmm.
he we got to be friendly after for a while. He started doing Star Frontiers on his own, play by email, and I went off on that. And he's like, here's a bunch of characters that players started and never finished. They don't have backgrounds or anything like that. So take one, pick whatever one you want, come up with something with it. So I had come up with it on short notice. So I, at the time, was reading Bernard Cornwell's Sharp series, Sharp's Rifles, which awesome. And I kind of borrowed the character's background a little bit and used it as a basis, and then kind of created my own on that over time. So if you have to borrow from something at first just to get an idea, that's fine too.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times do you look for inspiration? I mean, you look for inspiration in things sometimes,
For
and
sure.
then after a while, like I only did because I had to come up with something quick, and that was what I was reading at the time, so it worked perfect. But a lot of things, it's like with me, it's what if,
What
and
if?
it was like that with the Musketeer game. It's like that with just about everything, in the Star Trek game too. What if here's this great hero from the Cardassian War who liberates a Cardassian prisoner of war camp where his fiance was being held, and then guess what? She becomes a Maquis, and she works as a foil at times, and still, even in the revamped version of the game, still a foil, but
Right.
yet an ally at the same time.
Right. Yeah, I like what you said earlier. You said every NPC that you put into your character's background serves a purpose, and that crystallized it for me right now because, like, even using the bartender example, like that bartender does serve a purpose. And Frankie, like you might read that background and go, why are there two bars? Why are there two bartenders? What purpose does this serve? But it does serve a purpose because, like, Frankie's job is really stressful. She needs this outlet, so there's this character who runs a bar that she could go to where there could be an outlet for relieving the stress of the very violent and dangerous cop job that she had and now private eye job. But then on the other hand, she's got this other bar that's run by her father's friend, and there it's sort of like like a second family, people who understand her stresses. And so these characters serve purposes, not just for the role playing, but in the storytelling. I just I think that's it. I think that's an important point for
Yeah,
people to take away is that
and
the NPC
and,
should.
and yeah, and like the guy says in that documentary series, it's the supporting characters that make the character,
Mm,
and that's what I did without even ever hearing anything like that
mm,
before.
that's
Like I say,
fascinating.
this guy just kind of valid. I forget the guy's name, and I just
Yeah,
watched an episode yesterday.
I'll try to look it up and then I'll like I'll put it in post production. I'll put it on the screen here
Yeah,
so the
but
viewers can.
it's really fascinating. The series has been really fascinating, but episodes 3 and 4, I find to be very helpful. And if you ever get jammed up or looking on how to come up with a great character what it takes, check it out. Episodes 3 and 4.
Fantastic. Thank you, Paul. This was
Thank
fascinating.
you.
Mike, was there anything
Awesome.
else? Okay.
No,
Well,
I'm good. I'm good.
that was a great interview. That is super helpful, and I even learned something in this episode. So that's really amazing. Thank you, Paul. And I look forward to more the characters yet to come that
Um,
are floating around in
yeah,
that
there's
in that
ideas.
brain of yours.
There's
So
ideas,
there's ideas. I have no doubt.
but
So
let's
there
push
you
some
have
of
it,
the other
ladies.
ones first.
What's that?
Let's push some of the other ones first.
Okay, you got it. All right, so Mike, for our next show, Grognards of Gaming, is there a particular theme or story Oh, we should do the themes, right?
We should do the themes because we promised them themes this time, but we had a special guest, so very much worth it. And if Paul wants to join us for themes, I think that would be a wonderful idea.
Paul, would you like
Sure,
to
why
join us?
not? I have a few ideas in mind.
Fantastic. We got a three Grognard panel for next show. All right, this is exciting. All right, well, thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this and found it as informative and entertaining as I did. And we will see you next time on the Grognards of Gaming.
Thank you for having me.